Welcome to the Rustic Songbird podcast. I'm your host, Lydia Walker, and you're listening to episode number 91. Today on this show, you'll hear clips from the top 5 downloaded shows of 2020 and some of our favorite memories on the podcast this past year. I hope you enjoy this collection of the best of 2020 and this year in review on the show. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and I want to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already, because we have big plans going into 2021 of bringing some great guests, covering amazing topics, and helping you take your music to the next level. One thing that I'm super proud of is not missing an upload. We have had a weekly episode come out every single week in 2020, and that seems like something to celebrate just in itself. But I appreciate you listening today, and if you're just now finding the podcast, definitely want you to stick around because good things are coming ahead and the best is yet to come. I really believe that, and I'm so thankful to have you here. Before we get started with our top 5 downloaded episodes from this past year, I want to tell you about our Patreon community. Patreon is a way for you to support this show on a monthly basis and get some extra perks as well. To find out all the details for how you can be a patron of this podcast, go to patreon.com/rusticsongbird. Patreon is spelled Patreon. That's patreon.com/rusticsongbird to become a patron today. Thank you so much for your support. Let's get into today's show. All right, we are going to be counting down from the top 5 most downloaded podcast episodes from this past year and sharing a little clip from each of those top 5. We're going to count down from 5 to the number 1 most downloaded episode, and this is going to be so fun. I hope you enjoy it. I'm excited to share some clips from each of these awesome guests and loved having them on the show and getting to revisit some of these topics. The number 5 top most downloaded episode was with Grace Askew, and if you go all the way back to episode number 42, we talked about how to build your audience on Patreon. And Grace talked about building up an audience on social media and writing songs, including her audience. It was so helpful to hear from her about her strategy and how she organically grew her audience. And just one thing that she talks about a lot is daring to suck, like showing up before you're perfect, before everything's polished. And so I wanted to share a clip of her talking about this from her perspective of showing up before things are perfect and sharing that real and that raw part of your songwriting and your performing and your process so that your audience feels like they're a part of it and that they're coming along for the journey. So enjoy this clip where I talk to Grace Askew and we talk about building your audience, and she uses Patreon as well to connect with her audience on a deeper level, give them more content. So we talked a lot about that in the episode, but here's a clip of Grace talking about showing up without being perfect.
Yeah, and you said part of your mantra is dare to suck, which I've heard from several songwriters as just a way to like get past the perfectionism of like it has to be just right, it has to be a certain way, but just putting things out there raw and unpolished and let the song speak for itself.
Yeah, be prolific over perfect. I like to put it that way
good.
too. I mean, the artist's main job is to be comfortable with being really uncomfortable, like all the time. All the time. If you're comfortable, then you're not doing something right. Like you're just kind of floating along.
Yeah,
and
like that
I
vulnerability.
Yeah. And I tell myself that every day too. Like, Grace, you're getting a little too comfortable with just picking up a guitar and playing a song. You need to so I'll get new instruments or I'll experiment with electronic music on Ableton or like Pushpad or, just anything like that to like get me really uncomfortable again.
So good, right? I'm enjoying revisiting some of these clips, and I hope that you are too. If something strikes you, I would encourage you to scroll back and listen to those conversations because they are literally full of so much gold. Next, we have the number 4 spot where I interviewed Natalie Runyon on episode number 62, and we talked about creating boundaries. If there is one thing that we need to really evaluate this year, it is boundaries. And what does that look like? And when you're reevaluating what you should do, what you should not do, what to say no to, what to say yes to, it can get so overwhelming. And I really enjoyed her perspective talking about boundaries and mentorship. And so I'm going to share a clip of Natalie Runyon talking about the importance of creating boundaries and also practically how you can do that. So let's listen in to Natalie.
So I have people who I mentor, and I have people who mentor me. And that's usually when I get another opportunity like that. I have 5 women that are on a group text, and I'll text them all and say, hey guys, in June, I have the opportunity to go to the Immerse conference and speak and lead worship with Ascension. And I really am just seeking the Lord as if this is the thing, like, what am I supposed to talk about? And should I even go? And those women are on it in like a heartbeat. So once my husband says, run with it, then I submit to my mentors and say, okay, guys, this is the opportunity. What are your thoughts on that? And they never tell me not to do something or to do something, but they are the ones who will be like, well, my spirit feels a little bit. And some of them are like, run, you know?
Yeah.
So it just confirms maybe too, for some of us, like we talked about the hesitancy to say no. Sometimes the greatest gift that the Lord can give us are those spiritual coverings to say, hey, I don't have a good check in my spirit about that. And then you're able to be like, okay, it wasn't just me, right? It's like the spiritual checks and balances.
Yes, definitely. I've seen that too. And so I love that you have a group text of your ladies that you trust and people that know you and they want what's best for you. And so, you know, they're going to seek the Lord with you and give you good advice. And so it has to come from people that you do trust. But I'm really glad that you brought up like talking with your husband first, because they do have a different perspective. They see us behind the scenes like all the time, and they know, you know, how much we put into this. And so, a lot of times I know my husband is really good at saying no. And so he's like, do you need me to say no about something? Like, are you asking me so I will say no so you don't have to?
Yeah.
And so my dad was like that too. Before I got married, I would take things to him and sometimes he would say no for me. But I'm learning to say no for myself before I get in too deep. But it's good to have that, like you said, just to check in and see, you know, does this make sense? Am I thinking through everything? Is there any red flags that maybe I didn't notice because I'm too close to the situation or too emotional about it? Or, like you said, just having a couple different people to bounce it off of, like even just talking it out with a friend, or like I'll call my mom and talk through things. I'm like, okay, now that I've said it out loud, I think I know what to do. And she's like, glad to help.
I know. And our hearts are like so deceptive, because we do kind of lean towards emotion or feelings before, as women, I think sometimes we want to help people, but we get excited. I mean, I just know that I would go to Siberia if I had a reason to be excited about going to Siberia, right? But I wouldn't think about how am I going to get there and what am I going to do and where am I going to stay and how much is it going to cost? Like, I'm just like, I'm going to Siberia, like, you know,
like I'll just figure it out.
Yeah. And you need those people. And, you know, I remember a mentor of mine saying, if you don't know who to call to ask these things, think about 2 or 3 people in your life who have been 100% trustworthy in all things in your life. And for a lot of us, we would have to go back to almost like people from our childhood, like friends of our parents and people that we grew up in church with, or grandparents, because that is hard to find people who have not, you know, told our secrets or had a wrong motive about telling us to do something or not do something. And so I don't want to say that finding a sage is a good or is an easy thing. You know, finding a mentor is easy, because it's not.
I feel like we could just end it there and have some worship music playing and just say all the yes and amen. So much goodness in that clip from Natalie. And moving forward, I wanted to share something that kind of goes along with this from the top 3 spot, where I interviewed John Martin Keith, and we talked about how you can make a living in the music industry in episode number 49. And he was talking about how sometimes you have to set things up to take care of business and to make sure you take care of your family and things that will be stepping stones to whatever's next. So it might not be the most exciting thing for you, but it's important to set things up to where you can make a living doing something that you enjoy and something that will lead you to the success that you want. So this is a great clip from John Martin Keith in episode 49. Let's listen in.
If you're really good at something, it may not be it may not be your favorite thing to do. You might not enjoy it really at all, but if you're really good at it and it makes good income for you, I mean, those are things that you have to evaluate on an individual basis.
Right. It's a trade-off because
is.
you have time and you have to decide how to spend your time and where you're going to be making money, and also like how are you going to fund your music stuff, you know? And so I think it's important to just kind of show the real side of that, is like it is a juggling act sometimes.
Yeah.
Where as things change, you have to say yes to some things that might not be, you know, your ideal, but it could be for a short term. Or you could say no to things that are good but aren't the best, you know? And so I've been having to say no to some things, but that allows me to say yes to other things. Mm-hmm. And so just like having that balance, finding that balance of, you know, what is it that I want? Like you talked about, finding your goal and trying to make sure that everything that you're doing is at least moving towards that goal or helping in some way.
Right. Yeah. And if it's not, you know, again, sometimes you have to do those things for a season in order to pay the bills. But when that season is over, if you can let go of those things so that you can focus on the main things that you're wanting to accomplish, then, you know, then by all means. And, you know, we all have to do it.
All right. I'm not sure if you can tell, but I am smiling over here, just really enjoying hearing back to some of this great advice from people in the music industry who just get it. They are in it, and they have such a heart for encouraging songwriters and other musicians. And it just reminds me, the whole reason I started this podcast was to encourage you and to give you the tools and the encouragement to keep going. And sometimes we need some tough love. Sometimes we need that gentle nudge to just go for it. Sometimes we need reminders that it's not about perfection. And then other times we need practical advice for, okay, how exactly do we do that? So I'm so glad to be sharing this next clip with you. This is the number 2 top downloaded podcast episode of this last year. And it was with Alison Clark back in episode 41. And we talked about how to get your songs on Spotify playlists. This is definitely a hot topic in the streaming world for artists and recording artists trying to get their music out there on Spotify playlists to gain new fans. And so we talked about a simple, easy, and practical strategy for getting your songs on Spotify playlists without being spammy, and actually building relationships with these playlist owners and sharing gratitude and saying thank you when you are placed on a playlist. So I'll share that little clip of Alison talking about getting your songs on Spotify playlists and how to approach that coming up next. Here we go.
Another thing that I loved about playlist and getting your songs out there is they don't know you as an artist, and they may not hear your other stuff, but they're still being exposed to your song, and you might gain fans that way, but still they're hearing you when they wouldn't have heard you otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so it's just really neat. When I found that big Christmas playlist, I did the same thing, and I saw the person's profile picture, so I looked up their name on Facebook. Profile picture was the same, so it was obviously that person. And I sent them a message and I said, hey, thank you so much for including my song on your playlist. And it's a great one. So, you know, I just thank them for taking the time to put my song on there and including it. And it's been on there several years now. And so if you can make relationships with those people that are actually putting your songs out there and saying thanks, I really think that goes a long way too.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it that I was going to mention as well, is like, if they add your song, like you said, make sure you go back and thank them, because kind of getting back to what I was saying in songwriting, how relationships are so huge. It's like, even with something like this that might seem like, they're just like some random person with this playlist, like you actually have the opportunity to build a relationship there. And I think it's just really good, like practice to be super appreciative when someone does something for you. And then also it's important too to share that playlist. Like if you are added to a Spotify playlist, like the playlist owner, just similar to how you want to grow your audience, like they also want to grow their playlist following. So I think it's important as an artist to share when you get added to a Spotify playlist too.
Dun, dun, dun. I felt like we needed something dramatic right here. Counting down. How about a drum roll? Drum roll, please. There we go. Good enough. I'm not a drummer, sorry. But we are at the number 1 spot of the most downloaded episode of the podcast this past year, which was by and far the episode with Shay Watson back in episode 71. And we talked about how to slay as a multifaceted musician. And this is actually the longest podcast episode that we've had, I think, ever. It was over an hour. And normally I try to keep it to 30 to 45 minutes because once it gets to an hour, you kind of have to break it up into 2 listens. So that may have been you if you had to listen to it or you just don't make it all the way through. But it was full of so many good stories, and Shay shared experiences and advice for how to get your music in film and TV, how to build relationships with music supervisors. And so we're going to share a clip of a few minutes of Shay talking about his process and his encouragement for songwriters who are getting started and wanting to do something like this, where you're using your music and talents to build a career and do it in a unique way. So here's a clip from my interview with Shay Watson.
One thing I love about your website is that you have a music player there for all your songs on SoundCloud. And I was seeing you have a catalog up of like 2,700 songs. And I'm like, there are so many songs right here. And the great thing about it is anybody can do a SoundCloud. Anybody can put their songs, put your whole catalog out there and just have it where people can listen. I love that you send people to your whole list. Like, here's all the songs, go listen. And so I think that's something that anybody could do right away, is to just have your catalog available.
Yeah. It's something I would encourage people to do, is to have everything that you would want people to hear online in some form or fashion that you can point people to. I don't get a lot of people randomly finding my music that come to me for work. Most of the work that I get now is very specific. I don't do a lot of just general pitching of music. Most of my day is to wake up in the morning and I'll either get an email from my rep that says, "Hey Shay, I need you to call me. Project came in so-and-so from this company has asked if you can write," like the other day I had a request to write a Christmas song with flavors of Mexico, was the description of it, with like an underlying sentimentality and but hip hop loop. So I'll get calls like that during the day. So but I think in the beginning process, a lot of people have their catalogs and they're going to have to pitch existing stuff that they have. But anyone who seriously wants to make a day-to-day living in the TV and film industry, I would say get your production chops up and find a couple of instruments that you play really, really well. And what you don't do, partner up with somebody that can play the stuff that you can't and share the royalties with them.
Well, there you have it. What an amazing lineup. Big shout out to all of the amazing musicians that have been on the podcast this past year. It's such a blessing to be in community and have these conversations with people. It really inspires me, and I hope that it encourages and inspires you as well. That's definitely the heartbeat behind this show. If you are interested in being a guest on this show, you can actually apply to be a guest by going to rusticsongbird.com/apply. You can also send that link to anyone that you know that might be a good fit for the show. If you know a great songwriter or someone in the music industry who would cover a similar topic like this to help our audience, I would love to meet more people in the industry and bring in different perspectives from all different levels. So if that's you or someone you know, you can fill out the form at rusticsongbird.com/apply to potentially be a guest on this show. In my final words to you for this episode and the last episode of 2020, I just want to say thank you. Seriously, thank you for listening to this show. Thank you for sharing it. thank you for your feedback. It really does mean a lot. I have had some rough times during this year where it seemed like a lot of work and a lot of stress, and I got other things going on, and I thought, is this helping anybody? And then I would get a text from someone and say, you know what, this is making a big difference. I needed to hear what was on the show today or this week. And that feedback really makes a big difference. So I would love to hear what you think. Feel free to find us on Instagram at Rustic Songbird. You can also leave a review on iTunes, and that definitely helps other people find the show. And another way you can support the show is to become a patron on Patreon and support the show every single month. And you can go to patreon.com/rusticsongbird to get all the details for that. If you want to check out all the links that I talked about, they're all collected with the archive of episodes at the website, which is rusticsongbird.com/podcast. That's rusticsongbird.com/podcast for the list of all the previous episodes, the link to our Patreon. You can contact us from there as well and apply to be a guest on the show. So go check out the website. I really hope that you subscribe to this show because we've got great things coming in 2021. I'm so excited to take this podcast to the next level. I'm all about growing together, and collecting these amazing conversations is such a blessing to me. So thank you for listening again. Thank you for subscribing. Have a wonderful and happy new year, and I will catch you in the next episode of the Rustic Songbird podcast.